So we finished this series a couple weeks ago called Simple Gospel, and we started a new series called Right Here, Right Now, I think, right? I think it's what it's called. Right, yeah. Right Here, Right Now. And so we figured that the Simple Gospel was a really heavy biblical series, and there was a lot of stuff. It was like 17 months long, so we needed a series that was going to be very missional and very practical, and was really easy for you guys to walk away with something to use from this series. So Kevin started out last week talking about being open and this whole idea that God has gone before us and that God is already working in the lives of the people around us and in our lives, and he's already kind of clearing a path for us, and that we need to lean into that and trust that God is with us in that. And so today we're going to be talking about this idea of presence and of being present. And so if we're going to understand where we're going, we need to understand where we've been. So let's do a quick history lesson on the church history, okay? So if you hated history, sorry, it'll be quick, painless, hopefully. So Jesus resurrects. You guys probably knew that on Easter. He resurrects, and he appears to his followers, and he tells them, he says, go into all the earth and preach the gospel to every nation. Go throughout the entire world and just tell people, spread my kingdom, make disciples. And it's this really awesome message, right? It's this awesome message that God came down to earth, lived this perfect life, died for us in our place, and raised from the dead, and is now like restoring all things. So they have this incredible message. And so they go out, and the early church is spreading like wildfire, even amongst persecution. Even in a world where it's illegal to be a Christian, if you are a Christian, you could get arrested and possibly killed. It's still growing, it's flourishing, really awesome. And then it makes its way all the way up to the Roman emperor and this guy named Constantine, who you've probably heard of. He was the emperor of Rome, and his mom becomes a Christian, and then later on he becomes a Christian, and he thinks like, oh man, I'm gonna hook these guys up. They've been getting killed for lots of years for being a Christian. I'm gonna change that. And I'm going to help them out, and I'm going to set up this religion the best way that I know how. And since him being an emperor and being in government, he set the Christian religion up as a government. So he said, I'm going to give you awesome buildings that you can worship in. You can have all these temples that used to belong to our Roman gods. You can have those. You're going to need a leader, someone that's kind of like an emperor, so you can have like a pope type figure. You need a language, right? You need a language, you need a tax, which is like your tithe. You need all these things. And so with good intentions, Constantine sets up the church like a government, and it just goes on from there. It's crazy. And so despite his good intentions, despite trying to help out the church goes from being informal to being really formal. It goes from being fluid to being institutional. It goes from being relational and present in the community that it's in to being an organized structure, right? It goes from being flexible to the needs of what the community has to being about a time and a space that meets at this location at this time. It goes from being about spiritual health and growth of the neighborhood to attendance and the amount of people that are in the church, right? And it goes from being motivated by the mission of Jesus to being about membership and if you're in or not. And so this reign of the church begins, and it's kind of like a machine. Like Constantine basically just builds this machine unintentionally, right? He's trying to do well, but it turns into this machine, and it kind of separates people from the church, right? The people are down here, the church is up here. And so what was go make disciples, go be present and spend time with people and live life with them has now become go get more followers, which takes a lot less personal touch. In an effort to avoid misinterpretation and to help people out in a world that was mostly, they couldn't read, the Pope decides, I'm going to be the one that interprets the Bible for everyone. It's a good idea, right? Not a lot of people can read, so you don't want people like being lost in what's going on. So he says, hey, this is a good idea. I'm going to interpret this, but it creates more separation between the church and us. And then eventually someone has the idea of like, man, the governments have always been messed up in the world. What if God ran the government? That sounds awesome. And they're all like, yeah, that's a great idea. Why not do that? And so they did, which sounds like a good idea, but humans are flawed, and even ministers and pastors are flawed. So this huge gap keeps growing between the common people and the church and the clergy. And things get so bad that 1,300 years later, a group of people come from Europe to what would then be America in search of freedom, in search to get away from the machine and to do Christianity the way that it was supposed to be done, in a free way. But the roots of the machine run really deep, and these Christians in America find themselves in churches that look similar, if not exactly like the churches that they tried to run from in the past. And so this machine is going and going and going. And so that brings us up to today, all right? That wasn't that bad, right? Pretty painless. Yeah, it wasn't that bad. So today, the Western world, America, Europe, it's kind of moved on from where the church is. It's kind of moved on from this model. Which makes me think, you guys, how many of you guys remember the Macarena? You guys remember that? Anyone know that dance, right? Yeah, there you go. Kim's doing it. The Macarena. It's got these dance moves. Killer. If you don't know what it is, 1995, Los Del Rio took the world by storm. Every dance party, every school dance, every skating party, if you remember those, had that song played at it, maybe even twice, right? Incredible thing, incredible song. I still know the dance moves. I think most of you probably do. If you know that song, you know the dance moves. But I'm really glad we moved on. I'm really glad music moved on, and that wasn't the last song to be released. We weren't left with the Macarena, right? Like, by 1996, you're like, all right, we got it. We could do that. It still comes on at weddings occasionally, and you'll dance to it, but you're like, oh, man, this is old. So for some reason, the church has kind of been like that. They've kind of invented this really awesome dance, this really cool song that everyone loved for a while, and instead of moving on to a different song, instead of inventing new things, we kind of just stuck with that. We kind of just stayed with the Macarena, right? So Constantine sets up this religion. It's super cool. And he's like, guys, let me show you the Macarena. Let me show you this dance real quick. It goes like this. You're doing that move wrong. Let me show you, right? He sets this up, and everyone's like, this is awesome, man. This is the coolest dance I've ever done in my life. And the church keeps doing that. And so the Crusades come in the 1100s, and the Pope decides, really dark time, the Pope decides to torture and kill people who aren't Christians. And people are like, the Macarena, I'm definitely over it. It's not that cool anymore, right? If you're going to be doing that, I don't really want to do this dance anymore, but the church is like, hey, we're still doing it. We're still doing the same dance, right? The Renaissance come, and it's this rebirth of art and beauty and music and all this stuff. And there's these new things happening all around, but the church is still doing the same dance. Like, Da Vinci invents this awesome thing, and the church is like, but have you heard of the Macarena? And they're like, yes, we know what that is. The Enlightenment comes, and people start thinking for themselves, and there's this whole new Western thought, and the church is still doing the same dance. The Civil War comes, which is an awesome opportunity, right? Great opportunity for the church to jump in and be present and speak out against slavery and injustice. And instead, church is like, Macarena, still doing that dance. You know that dance, right? Civil rights movement comes in the 60s, another incredible opportunity for the church to stand up against injustice and against evil in our world, and still doing the Macarena, still doing the same dance. In the 80s, we get the AIDS epidemic, which is terrible, killing millions of people. An incredible opportunity for the church to reach out and be present in the world, but they're still doing the same dance, right? And so this model of the church that we've created, that Constantine created, has been dying for like 200 years. For the past 200 years, in America, all around the world, in Europe, it's been dying. In Europe, the church is almost completely dead. They say that in like the next 20 years, the Church of Scotland, the Church of England, the Church of Wales, the Methodist Church, the United Kingdom will all close their doors for the last time. They will be done. They will be gone. And it's a similar trend happening in America. But for some reason, like the writing's on the wall that we're dying, but we're still like, hey, this dance, right? So cool. We can't adjust to it. And so we should be going out into the world and preaching the gospel, and instead we've made it to where the world has to come to us to get the gospel. Have we spent the last 100 years, is it possible that we've spent the last 100 years judging instead of loving? That we spent the last 150 years building fences to keep people out instead of building wells for people to come and to drink and be filled up? Is it possible that we spent the last 150 years withdrawing from our society and from our world instead of embracing people? Or have we been consuming instead of serving? America, whether you like it or not, has abandoned us as we have abandoned the thing that Jesus called us to do. Yes, 73% of Americans say that they are Christians. 73% would identify themselves as Christians, but the amount of people that actually practice their faith, that actually attend church or in a small group together or pray or anything is more like 30% of the country. And it's getting lower all the time. So this is where we are. We're still doing the same old dance. We're still doing the same song. We still make it on the radio every once in a while. We still get played at a couple weddings and all that, but we're old and people are over it. They've moved on. And so we're living in a world where we're not the center of it anymore, right? People don't want to listen to us. They don't listen to us like they used to. We don't get played like we used to. They don't believe the same things that we believe. People don't live like we do. And so things are changing. And we're kind of foreigners. Like as Christians here in America, we are somewhat exiles. We are living in a land that isn't the good old days anymore, that doesn't surround us anymore. We are like kind of the minority in the world. And so maybe it might be time to like re-examine ourselves and rethink how we do things, because the way we've been doing it for the past 200 years has not been working at all. People are way over the Macarena. They've moved on to the YMCA or something, right? They've moved on to other things, and we're still doing the same thing. So maybe it's time to re-examine ourselves. And we haven't dealt with this change. We haven't dealt with this change of song, this change of dance very well. There's typically like 3 extreme responses that people do to the changes that are going on in the world around us. And so this first one is that people withdraw. They declare that there's a culture war going on. And so they say, we're not going to associate with those people. We're going to pull our kids out of school. We're going to shelter everyone. We are going to build a fence around our house, and we are not going to associate with what's going on in the culture around us. They just withdraw. The next reaction is people just conform. They just say, well, being Christian was cool 50 years ago, but that's kind of hard now, so I'll just give in and just be whatever. I'll just be an American all the way, do whatever that means, and abandon everything that I used to believe. And the third thing is that people fight. These fighters typically try and grab a hold of the old ways and try and just pull them back, and they just don't want to let go. They're like, oh, I'm not letting go of this, right? Or fighters typically embrace some sort of politician and think that by getting that politician into office, that will then change things back to the way they used to be, and we will no longer be in exile. So how are we supposed to respond? Because all 3 of these are kind of extreme. All 3 of them are not particularly helpful. So what do we do? So today we're going to be looking in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah takes place during the Babylonian exile. King Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and he comes into Judah and Israel, and he just destroys the Assyrian Empire. So Assyria had control of the Holy Land, of Jerusalem, of this whole area, and Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he destroys it. I think we have a map of the Roman Empire, or the Babylonian Empire up here. Yeah, so this is what it is. Took over this entire area up here around 586 BC. And so he takes most of the Jews. There's a couple left over, but he takes most of them and he takes them to the city of Babylon, which is actually like right across the street from Baghdad today. So he takes them over there. It's not that bad of a place to live. We have some images of what Babylon might have looked like, I think. I mean, that's not that bad, honestly. They knew how to build. They had these temples. You may have heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which are one of the 7 wonders of the world, ancient world. They had those there. It was an awesome place. They had these beautiful gates. We have a picture of one of these gates here. This is a piece of one of the gates that they found. Just one piece of like 8, this incredible blue stone. So they were really, really awesome builders. Honestly, like pretty cool people. But they take the Jews and they take them back to Babylon, and they're allowed to build houses, they're allowed to work, they're allowed to still be Jews. They can still practice their religion, but they just can't go home anymore. And so Jews who are used to living in a world where everything was Jewish, the government, the society, everything around them was like saturated in this Jewish little bubble here. They're used to living in that way. They're now living in a nation that couldn't care less about their God or what they believed. They have a government that doesn't do things to help them out. They don't really care. They're not going to benefit them. They have a society that does things that I would get fired for if I said from stage what they did, right? They have a society that does like awful things, far from the strict, rigid laws of Moses that they're used to, right? So they can still live. They're not slaves, but they're definitely not in the good old days anymore, which is totally understandable. It sounds familiar, right? I can almost imagine an orange Jewish guy walking around with a red tunic with engraving, "Make Israel Great Again," you know? He's like, it sounds familiar. Could be, probably not, but you know, you get the comparison. That'd be really funny. So, While this is all happening, while this is all going down, prophets arise. And if you don't know what a prophet is essentially a mouthpiece for God. It's someone that God uses to speak to the people, to speak truth, to remind the nation of Israel of the hard truths that they might be forgetting. Like, hey, you're over there, remember that God said this, and we should probably come back over here because you guys are getting far off, okay? So this guy named Jeremiah comes up, and just like America, there's people who are withdrawing, right? They're saying, those Babylonians, I can't even look at them. I'm not going to be near them. And there's people that are conforming and just saying, I'm a Babylonian now. I'm going to do all these terrible things that we can't even talk about because it's tough to be Jewish right now, so I'm just going to give up, all right? So that's where we are in this text. And so today, we are in Jeremiah 29, and I know what you're thinking. Yes, I have that on my wall at home. I have a tattoo of that. It's with background on my phone, right? Jeremiah 29:11. We're not going to read 11, okay? We're going to read 4 through 9, okay? So Jeremiah 4 through 9. So God gives the Jews very clear instructions on how to live in a land that they're exiles in, okay? They are exiles here, and God says, this is how you need to live your life. So it says this is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he was exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. Build homes and plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away, and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. So what did God not say there? God did not say, give up, it's tough, I've lost, God must not be real, just give in to whatever you feel like doing, just let it go, it's failed. This whole experiment of being God's chosen people hasn't worked out, it's done. He didn't say that. He also didn't say, beware, stay away, hide your children, hide your wives, hide people from this place. Do not associate with these Babylonians. They are evil. Create your own subculture with music and books and movies. Shelter everyone. Do not associate yourselves with these people who have a different point of view than you. God did not say that either. He didn't say either of those things. Instead, he says, be present. He says, settle. Change your address to a Babylonian address. Like, make that your home. Build a beautiful house for yourself. Have a career. Engage in society around you. Buy land, plant gardens, eat what you harvest from those gardens. This really important part. He says, marry off your kids, grow your family so you may become grandparents. And he says, work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I've sent you. Pray for it. Pray to your neighbors that have completely different viewpoints as you, that vote a different way. Pray for them. If those people thrive, then you will also thrive. That's kind of like a picture of the book of Acts. Like Kevin talked about Acts last week. That's kind of a picture of Acts, how these people are living, right? This Jeremiah life. The early church lived like that. Like, the issues came when we started to separate ourselves and not be present and not settle in the land that we lived in. These issues came. And so the moment that the church stops being about loving and restoring the world around them is the moment that they stop being the church that Jesus wanted them to be. So Jeremiah 29 is not, when I read that, it's not how I think the church has reacted to this change in culture over the last few years. It's not how we've reacted to being in exile. And so church, Crossview, people in this room or not in this room, you have got to stop withdrawing yourself from the world around you. God did not put you on earth so that you can be a recluse, that you can just wait for the next life. How can we love our neighbors if we think that they're crazy? How can we take the kingdom to the world around us if we think that the world around us is just evil and terrible and awful? There's been this thought that's developed in the church. I don't know how it developed in the church. That might be another sermon for another day. But there's this thought that's developed that, like, sharing the gospel is for other people. That loving your neighbor as yourself sounds cool, but that's really only for, like, missionaries that live in third world countries. Taking the kingdom, doing the Great Commission is only for paid church staff members. That's not really for me. That's the machine's job. The machine does that. I pay my tax. I show up every once in a while. The machine takes care of that other stuff. And that's like poisonous. That's a terrible thought to have. If we are going to change, if the church is going to change, if it's going to survive, if it's going to take the kingdom, if we're going to do the one thing that Jesus told us to do, you have to accept that your life is your mission field. Where you live, your life right now is your mission field. See, in Jeremiah 29, the mentality of the Jews was, God is in the temple. There's a building, there's a space that we can go to be with God in his presence. And now we're in exile and we don't have a temple anymore. How are we going to reach God? How is God going to reach us? We're far away from that temple. We need to get back to that spot. What we see here in this text and as history unfolds, no, God is with them. God goes with them in their neighborhoods, in Babylon, in this society that beforehand they thought, those people are awful, I will not even touch them. God's like, no, I'm actually there. I'm with them right now. He's calling out to them, hey, come on, I got this cool adventure planned for us. So why do we think that God has not called us to where we are right now, that God is not with us away from this building? God's not confined to this address. He's not confined to the churches. He's not confined to your small groups. He's out there with people. God did not put you here so that you could leave it. He did not put you in that house, in that neighborhood, so you could treat it like a panic room. God doesn't put people in our lives so that we can judge them or we can just think that they're weird or crazy, right? When you view this life as a waiting room for the next, you miss out on the very thing that God has created you to do, and that's to be present. The street that you live on, the town that you live in, the people you work with or live near, the friends you have, the parents at your kids' soccer games, those people, that is your mission field. That is the place that God has brought you to be Jesus to the world, to take the kingdom. If you look in Jeremiah, that verse again, in verse 4 and verse 9, it says twice in there, I have brought you here. The exile, the land, the Jews, the place that I have brought the Jews to be in exile. God literally took the Jews from their home, from their comfortable home, and went, boom, this is where I need you right now. You're supposed to be there. But for some reason, we're like, no, God did not do that with me. There's no way. There's no way. So we've heard the simple gospel. We've heard the simple gospel. For 17 months, we've heard that. It's the most complex, simple gospel I've ever heard in my life. But we've heard it, okay? So what do we do about it? What do we do? We've got to change our dance. We have to stop doing the Macarena, or else we are going to die. We're going to cease to exist as the church in America. And so it's not that difficult. We've somehow made it crazier than it really is. Maybe this is a trick that ministers do for job security, They're like, wait, if I make this seem really difficult, then they'll still need to pay me. And so, I don't know. I would love for you guys to put me out of a job because you're taking the kingdom so well. But in all seriousness, in all reality, it would be my dream, and I assume it would be Kevin's dream and Milt's dreams and Chris' dreams, that the kingdom is flourishing so well in this area that we don't need paid staff members. We've made it seem way more difficult than it really is. So I'm going to give you 4 things to be more present, 4 ways to be present in the life that you have right now. So the first one, meet Jesus. Meet the real Jesus, actually. Don't just meet. Let Jesus be your reference point. Read through the Gospels and figure out who Jesus really is compared to who we think he is or who we want Jesus to be. We've changed, many of us, myself included, have watered down Jesus and made him into someone who affirms all of our beliefs and doesn't challenge us to go out of our comfort zones. Jesus is like this friend that comes along with us, but it's he doesn't really ask me to do anything crazy. If you think that Jesus wasn't present in the community, if you think he wasn't present in his neighborhood, in his culture around him, then you haven't met the real Jesus. If you think that Jesus is okay with social injustice and poverty and brokenness in your town and that it's someone else's problem to fix, then you haven't met the real Jesus. If you think that Jesus votes a particular way, you think he votes one side of the party, you have not met the real Jesus. If you think Jesus is okay with our prejudices and our racism and the way that we act towards our neighbors and Muslims and Mexicans and immigrants, then you haven't met the real Jesus. Step 1 to being present is find out who Jesus actually was, what he actually stood for, and ask what would Jesus actually do? What would the real Jesus do versus the Jesus that I want to believe? That's the first step to being present. Second step is to engage. Engage the world around you. Jesus went everywhere. He went after everyone, including the worst society had. Jesus knew the political climate of the area that he was living in. He knew the issues and struggles of the towns that he was in, and he addressed those things. He engaged with those things. Jesus has moved. He moved into our neighborhood. He moved in amongst sin and death and pain just to live with us, just to meet us where we are, He goes to the places that we are broken. He goes to the places that we sin, and he confronts those things. So why do we feel like it's beyond us to go into our own neighborhoods and confront those things, to be present there? It seems like I could never do that. There's no way. Spend time in a third space of your community. So your home is your first space. Your work is your second space. Spend time in a third space. Find the places in your community that people go to unwind, to relax, to talk with one another, to be themselves, to let down their barriers, the places that promote community in your community. Find those places and become a regular. Speak the language of the people there. Don't expect non-Christians to act like you do. Don't expect that from them. You see this all the time with Jesus in the temple courts or Jesus in the marketplace. He went to where people were, the places that people hung out in his society, and he interacted with people. Step number 3, trust that God has gone before us. Kevin talked about this last week, but we need to trust that God has already gone. He's already made a way. He's already opened doors for us. He's primed. He's cleared a path for us, and we need to walk into that. So where are the places where God has opened up doors for you? Where are the places that you have opportunities? You could feel them, right? You can feel these places that like God is kind of nudging me towards this direction. Maybe it's the parents, like I said, the parents at your kids' soccer practice or the restaurant that you go hang out at, those people there that you talk with. Where are the places that are receptive to you? Find those places and figure out how to speak the gospel in their language. Getting people to come to church should not be your goal. That should not be your number one goal in life. If they're not in church now, they probably don't really associate well with this sort of like way of doing things. That should not be your goal. But be confident in knowing that God has already gone before. God's already cleared a path for you, and he's just waiting on you to come. He's already like made this road for you, and he's just waiting for us to go. So we need to go out confidently knowing that God's gone before us. The fourth thing to be present, get weird. Not gonna lie, it's gonna get weird, okay? It's all right. Break up the awkwardness here. God is going to lead you to places that are out of your comfort zone and that are just flat out weird, and we need to be okay with that. You need to be all right and accept that that's part of life. For some reason, every time I go to Cincinnati, every time I go downtown, I'm like a magnet for homeless people, and it makes me uncomfortable every time. Every time I interact, some homeless person comes up to me, they want to like tell me their life story, they want to sing a song with me. Half the time I end up singing hymns with homeless people, and it's super uncomfortable for me. Every time I like walk past a homeless person, I'm like, not today. Oh, all right, we're in it. Okay, here we go. The students have seen this. I took the students to Cincinnati last summer, and we were walking down the street one day, and there's a curb here, and I'm like looking this direction, and this guy grabs me by the arm and pulls me down to sit with him, and all of a sudden he's telling his life story to me and all this. It's really weird, but it's super cool every time. It's this awesome experience that God uses to teach me to love people that are different than me and to embrace them. My friend Kelsey lives in Cincinnati. She works for a nonprofit there, and she found herself in coming into contact with girls that were currently prostitutes. Totally out of her comfort zone, totally weird, really weird, but she couldn't shake it. They kept coming to her. She kept meeting these girls, and instead of judging them or saying, like, go to the church, that's the machine's job to do that, she then opened this house called Weightless Anchor, where prostitutes can go in and they can rest and they can sleep and they can have a warm meal and a shower and they can do a Bible study and talk to other girls about what's going on in their lives. Super weird, right? But she leaned into that. Or my buddy Sean, who has trouble sitting in church. You don't have to raise your hand on this one, but if you have trouble sitting in church, mentally raise your hand. He's too ADD, right? He can't focus for that long. It's like, I want to be here, but I can't focus. But he loves to water ski. And so one Sunday morning, he skipped church to go water skiing, and he was about to get onto his boat, and he felt like God was just going to smite him with a lightning bolt. Like, I'm skipping church right now. Please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. And so he's with his friends, and he got out his Bible real quick and found the shortest psalm that he could and read that psalm and prayed real quick, like as fast as he could, and then they went on. And then the next week, he goes back there, and his friends are like, hey, are we going to read the Bible today? And now he has a collection of like 30 men that get together on Sunday mornings to do something that they love, that God's given them to do, water skiing, and he shares the gospel with them, and they pray for one another and open up their lives to one another. Or my friends Joel and Tabby, who live at the University of Nottingham. And they're riding the bus one night, and they realize on Wednesday nights the bus is like packed. There's so many people here on Wednesday nights. I don't know why this is. So they did some digging in their community and found out that on Wednesday nights the school throws massive parties for the students, and they just get trashed. So they thought, all right, well, Thursday Thursday mornings, more like Thursday afternoons, we'll do free breakfast for these people. And they provide a space for kids to come in and eat breakfast. And they know that it's weird. They know they're going to be hearing some crazy stories and that people are going to feel really bad. But they're like, we're going to lean into this because this is a door God has opened. And it's really weird, but I'm going to still do this. And so this is nothing new. This is how the church has operated for the first 300 years of its existence. This is what the early church did. They didn't have buildings, they didn't have structures, they didn't have traditions because they didn't need them at all. That was not needed. Their life was their mission field. The city they lived in was their church. They settled down, they built homes, they planted gardens, they prayed for the benefit of their city, they loved their neighbors. They did this whole Jeremiah 29 exile life. And they sought out places where God is moving. They looked for places God is moving, and they leaned into those, even if they were weird. And when I think about Jesus, I see a man who didn't withdraw from culture. He didn't withdraw from the world around them. He ran into the culture head first. He didn't conform and give up because things were tough, because people weren't receptive. He didn't fight and try to use political power to gain influence. He moved into our neighborhood. He laid down roots. He prayed for the well-being of our city. He followed God's leading in his life, and he loved people around them. He ate and drank with sinners. He went to people's houses. He hung out with prostitutes. He loved everyone that he met, and he commands us to do the same. So this whole thing, this isn't a mission trip. This isn't a new philosophy on happiness. This doesn't earn you a ticket to heaven. This is how to be human. This is the way that God created us to live in the garden. It's the way that we will live when he comes back, when the kingdom comes fully. God has cleared a path. He's made a way. He's working behind the scenes, and he's with you. And he's trying to get us to take the kingdom to the people around us, to be present in our neighborhoods and in our cities. There's a whole world, literally a whole world of opportunity in front of you and in front of us. And we have to go. Your life is your mission field, and it's time for us, the church, to be present right here, right now. Let's pray. God, this mission that you've given us is not easy. It's uncomfortable, and it's weird, and it's scary, but it's what you've called us to do. You've called us to love our neighbors. You've called us to be present where we are in the lives of the people around us, God. And I pray that we can lean into that, and that we can quit withdrawing from the places that we don't understand, that we can quit doing the Macarena and come up with something new that reaches the people around us, and that we can love people unconditionally, God. We thank you for the sacrifice that you made for us. We pray this in Jesus' name.